Tech Talk Tuesday. Tech Talk Tuesday. Tech Talk Tuesday. You mean Thursday.
All right, thank you for joining us for another 10-minute Tech Talk Thursday. This is Michael Weir, Fortinet NSE 7 Certified Technical Account Manager for Fortinet here at Ingram Micro. Today's topic is going to be GoldenSpy. Now, GoldenSpy brings up an interesting question to us. Which wins, business or security? Now, I would make the argument that this doesn't need to be a competition between the two, but sometimes it does come down to a choice where there is one that is definitely blocking out the other, and GoldenSpy was a case in point of this. So, what happened with GoldenSpy? I'll do my radio voice again. A Chinese bank forced Western companies to install malware-laced tax software. In other words, the problem we had here is that companies that were working with the Sino Bank, and forgive me if I'm mutilating that name, in China were required to install proprietary tax software to pay Chinese taxes. The problem with that is that this piece of tax software included malware built right into it. And the solution for this, I would say, is sandboxing, web filtering, EDR. You could also say UEBA, any number of things along those lines. There's a whole lot of different hammers with which to hit down this nail. We're going to cover a few major ones later on. But first, let me give you a little bit of a background on what happened here. So way back in 2016, the first variants of GoldenSpy were detected and didn't raise much of a stink. In 2019, a domain utilized by this version of GoldenSpy is registered. Why do I mention that? Well, that means that this whole thing was planned. April 2020, TrustWave, the company, finds GoldenSpy active in Sino tax software. Once again, sorry for destroying the name. And in July 2020, even more disturbing, and I'll explain why in a second, GoldenSpy uninstaller appears and negates GoldenSpy's effects in the Sino, software. So first, let's talk about why it was bad. Intelligence tax software, which is the software in question from the Sino, forgive me, credit information company, it was required for people doing business with the Bank of Sino in China to pay taxes. And while you were executing and installing that, it silently downloads and executes a file called svminstaller.exe as part of its normal operation. And then that svminstaller.exe installs two services, svm.exe and svmm.exe, into a differently labeled program file named intuitively svm. Now, these two are installed as auto-start services, and they watch each other, and if one is killed, the other one will restart it, and if that one is killed, the other one will restart it back and forth. Not just that, but if neither of them are running upon startup, a third one, a program monitor, watches for their existence, and if they're not there, re-downloads them. So we would call this triple layer persistence. And that's not normal in tax software. In fact, it's not normal in very much of anything at all. And both of these things, the SVMM, and this software that checks to make sure they're there and potentially re-downloads them, operate by default with system privileges, which once again for a tax software is completely not normal. And then the last thing that happens is that the SVM, they gather the system information and exfiltrate it to that site that I'm not even going to try to pronounce on the screen over port 9006. And then they remain open as a backdoor. The significance of that is entirely different than the website that all the tax information is sent to. And we would expect them in a tax software, they didn't want to spread information around, or expect it to all go to the same place. But this, instead of going to the bank, is actually going to the Nanjing Chekwao Network Technology Group. And I'm sure I murdered that one too. It gets worse though, because suddenly an installer appears, and then it disappears. So obviously everybody thinks, oh, an uninstaller is good, now that spyware is no longer there. Well, here's the problem, is that the uninstaller also installed itself silently, and with default system level privileges. And it uninstalled the parts of the tax software that were related to the malware, the GoldenSpy malware, and took them out, and then it erases itself when it's done, so that there's no evidence GoldenSpy was there, and there's no evidence the uninstaller was there. And the speed and efficiency with which the installer was deployed and the uninstaller was deployed makes this look more like a team of professionals than a bunch of hackers. All right, hackers are worried about keeping themselves anonymous. They're not necessarily worried about covering their tracks inside a piece of tax software. This is one of these things where it's almost like we were saying, let's just put this in there and hope we don't get caught, and then when we get caught, we'll go through and uninstall it. The problem, of course, is that This means that there is still the ability for the company that made the software that had GoldenSpy in it to do these things inside the software without the user's consent, even if it is just uninstalling the bad things they had there to begin with. So this is still a bomb waiting to drop. So what do? Save us, Techie Mike, save us! Well, here's the ways to stop it. These are the major four that I identified. I spoke about EDR in the first slide there. As I rolled into this, I decided it's fully worth mentioning EDR. We're just going to mention it as sort of a layer of endpoint. So there's really four places we can stop this, right? We can stop it at the software installation point, which is when you use tools like sandboxing or things that sense malware or have indicators of compromise to sanitize and or destroy these things before they activate. You can also stop them at the software operation. That's where you have endpoint protection or EDR that alerts and blocks Trojan-like activity. Next is data exfiltration. You could stop it there if you had a tool to look for anomalous or potentially bad patterns in data. And then, of course, UEBA, which is going to look for your sudden file folder changes and endpoint that are happening where they shouldn't be. So let's see it in action with humorous animations. So we're going to take GoldenSpy, and that is represented by that bomb in the colors of Communist China. And then that's our poor little laptop below. And with no protection whatsoever, bomb blows us up. Now, almost everybody these days, if you're a business, you have some kind of firewall. And if you have some kind of firewall, that means you think you have some kind of protection. But turns out the bomb can drop right through in this case because it's not configured in such a way that would be recognized as known malware. So the trick to that, how to solve it, is to add sandboxing to your firewall at the gateway. So what this is it will generally be a last packet hold, or maybe a conscientious hold where it just slows down the packets and doesn't send the whole file onto the end user or sends the file onto the end user in an unopenable way until it runs the file itself in a VM and determines what's wrong with it. Now, some of you might be saying, well, yeah, but doesn't it just pass through and then return the verdict? Well, yes, 5 years ago, but we don't live 5 years ago now. We live in the present age when things are actually protected. So in this case, like I'm the Fortinet guy, you all know that by this point, so I'm going to talk about FortiSandbox. The FortiGate would send it to the FortiSandbox. The FortiSandbox would run some static code analysis on it and look at its previous definition database, all that kind of thing. If necessary, sandbox it in a VM and track every single process it did. And when it saw these installers start popping off and installing this other software silently with no window, all these different things, it would collect those indicators in a tracer file and then render a verdict that would be this file is infected. So whoop, and we are safe. Now that's gateway sandboxing. You can actually do the same thing on an endpoint. So this would be client sandboxing. And you could actually make the same picture represent EDR either way. Of what's going to happen is it's going to go down to the client, in this case being protected by FortiClient, and get diverted off unopenable to either a sandbox or just plain killed by an EDR program pre-execution. Either way, this is another way of stopping, basically the same way we stopped at the gateway, except doing it at the endpoint. Or is it more efficient to do it at the gateway? Are all of your endpoints always going to be behind your gateway? In most situations these days, no. So that's why it merits having something protecting the endpoint as well. Then, of course, there's your SIM solution. Now, SIMs can cover pretty much anything. They track every little packet. As a result, they would see it go through, and it wouldn't necessarily be detected by a scam. It would be tagged as traffic going through the network. Now, what probably would catch a SIM administrator's eye is when it starts sending out data it's not supposed to send out. And you could either have an alert or a warning set up on this, just have somebody who's got a big brain sitting there watching the screen. Obviously, everybody tunes their SIM in a different way, so I can't guarantee this would work. This is just one possible way it could work. Or we have our last option, the UEBA, which is User and Entity Behavior Analysis. So what this would be, the file goes through, lands on the PC, PC gets infected, it tries to send stuff back out, but the UEBA tags it and says, hey, this is system information being exported. Do you want the user to be able to do this? And then the tech on the other end takes and checks a little box, says, no, I don't want the user to be able to do this. And while the infection is still present, that host is now quarantined, we can go in and figure out what it is we need to do to clean it. Now, obviously, the easiest thing to do in all of these is to stop it at the gateway and not get to one of these levels where we're stopping it from sending things out. But you have to remember, in this situation, we're at a point where the bank required people to have this tax software in order to do business with them. So it's not necessarily like we can just say, oh, we're not going to install the software. Oh, that file's infected. We're not going to use it. Now, that's where I said it's business versus security, right? If they don't have this file and this program on there, they can't do business. But if they do business with this file, they aren't secure. Even though the malware part's been uninstalled, it's very obvious they didn't remedy the problem that, or if it's not a problem, the design that allows that to be put in there in the first place. So in the balance, there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer to it. I would say what you have to do is make a decision and say, is it worth having this software do this function if it has a risk of these other functions, and do I have enough protection to keep those other functions from taking place? So I might have to whitelist it through my sandbox, even though it's going to come back as infected because I just plain need the software. But I can use a SIM or a DLP or a UEBA solution or an EDR solution to prevent it. Well, probably not EDR. EDR would probably stop it before it tried to run, but to prevent it from sending information back out of my network. So it's a trade-off. Is it a great situation to do that? No. I mean, you've knowingly let yourself be infected, but at the same time, you're continuing to do business, and for the time being, you've got the situation under control. So my call to action on this one would be to make sure that you have advanced endpoint and or network protection on your network to stop things just like this, because this is a day and age where cybercrime is becoming the new mafia, or it's becoming the new triads, or whatever. I see in those movies referencing the Asian version thereof that might have been in China operating this. So you just have to remember, sometimes you're going to need this stuff to do business, but that doesn't mean you have to just be naked out there. You can have advanced endpoint or network protection to protect you from the consequences of things like this that you might have to do. So thank you. As always, my name is Michael Weir. Feel free to contact me with any questions, comments, concerns, issues you wish to raise. Leave some comments on the video, subscribe if you'd like to, and otherwise have yourselves a good day.